So when I was 14, I had just been diagnosed with leukemia. This was October, late October, early November of 2001.
Medical science says the brain dies in minutes without oxygen, turning your memories into static. But when 14-year-old Zach Tavcar's heart stopped, he didn't hallucinate. He brought back a specific physical secret from the past that his living brain had never encountered. Science calls it impossible, but the evidence suggests otherwise. How exactly did this happen? Before the miracles and the scientific confusion, Zach was only a young boy merely trying to survive a medical crisis that pushed his soul to the very edge of the unknown. The sudden diagnosis. In August 2001, the world felt steady and predictable for 14-year-old Zach Tavcar. He was a typical teenager living in Reno, Nevada, dealing with the usual things that middle schoolers face. Life was supposed to be about sports, school, and hanging out with friends during the final weeks of summer. However, a strange shadow began to fall over his daily routine. At first, it started with a persistent ache in his back that would not go away no matter how much he rested. Soon, these small pains turned into violent back spasms that left him breathless and weak. His parents watched as their energetic son transformed into a boy who could barely stand without help. They hoped it was something minor, perhaps a bad flu or intense growing pains, but deep down they knew the situation was serious and had to do something about it. Immediately, his parents took him to the pediatrician, and it turned their lives upside down in a matter of hours. The doctor took one look at Zach's symptoms and sent the family straight to the Children's Infusion Center at renowned Children's Hospital. Within moments, the medical team diagnosed Zach with acute lymphocytic leukemia, also known as ALL. This specific type of cancer is a biological juggernaut because it attacks the white blood cells with incredible speed. In a healthy body, these cells protect you from infection. In Zach's body, however, they were multiplying uncontrollably and crowding out the healthy cells he needed to stay alive. It was a race against time that his young body was already losing. As time went by, the hospital ward became his new reality, overnight. It was a place filled with the scent of antiseptic and the constant, rhythmic hum of heart monitors. For a teenager, the silence of an oncology unit is heavy and unnatural. You see the flickering fluorescent lights and hear the soft squeak of rubber shoes on the linoleum floor. Zach spent his days connected to IV lines while toxic chemicals pumped through his veins to kill the cancer cells. The treatment was brutal and exhausting. While the doctors worked to save him, Zach began to feel a strange intuition about his situation. He had a quiet sense that something beyond the physical pain was waiting for him. As the weeks passed, the toll of the chemotherapy and the disease reached a breaking point. His internal organs were struggling to keep up with the intense medical intervention. One day, a sudden complication during his treatment sent his system into a total tailspin. The machines that kept track of his vitals began to beep as his blood pressure plummeted and his heart struggled to maintain its rhythm. This was the moment the medical battle moved from a long-term recovery plan to an immediate fight for life. But while the doctors focused on his blood cells, Zach was about to embark on a journey that no medical textbook could prepare him for. The medical emergency. The quiet rhythm of the oncology ward shattered in an instant. High-pitched alarms began to wail, signaling that Zach's heart had finally surrendered to the pressure of his treatment. A code blue was called over the intercom, sending a wave of medical professionals sprinting toward his room, and the atmosphere shifted from a controlled medical environment to a scene of frantic desperation. In the middle of this chaos, Zach's body lay still, becoming the center of a storm he was no longer a part of. When the heart stops beating, a person enters a state known as clinical death. Most people assume everything goes dark immediately. However, the human brain often exhibits a final surge of electrical activity that lasts for about 30 seconds. On another angle, scientists believe this is the biological equivalent of a computer trying to save its data before the power cuts out completely. During this window, the physical senses typically shut down in a specific order. Hearing is usually the last to go, followed by sight, until the person is left in a void of total sensory deprivation. For Zach, The experience was the complete opposite of a shutdown. As his vision failed and the sounds of the hospital faded, he felt a sudden expansion of his awareness. He was no longer confined to his struggling body or the pain of his leukemia. Instead, he found himself hovering near the ceiling of the room, looking down at the intense effort to save him. He watched as the medical team used a defibrillator to send jolts of electricity through his chest. He could see his dad's face, filled with terror. This is what researchers call veridical perception, where a person sees things while they are clinically dead that they should not be able to know. While the doctors worked for only a few minutes, Zach experienced a profound sense of time dilation. In our world, the clock was ticking normally. Yet for him, those seconds stretched into what felt like hours of quiet observation. He felt a deep sense of peace that replaced the fear he had carried since his diagnosis. The silence of the soul was far more powerful than the noise of the emergency, and it creates a massive scientific paradox. You see, a brain starved of oxygen should be incapable of forming clear, structured memories, but for Zach, he was recording every detail of the room with perfect clarity. As the doctors fought to bring his body back, Zach was already drifting into a realm where the rules of physics no longer applied. He was moving away from the hospital walls and the frantic energy of the living. The medical team was successful in restarting his heart. However, the person who was returning was no longer the same boy who had flatlined moments before. He was carrying a secret that would eventually force the scientific community to reconsider what exactly happens when we die. The architecture of the afterlife. The transition from the sterile hospital room to the next phase of Zach's experience was almost unbelievable. He found himself moving through what many people describe as a tunnel of light. Zach did not see this as a physical tube made of stone or metal. Instead, it felt like a shift in his own state of mind, a passage leading him away from the typical world and into something much larger. As he moved through it, the sensation of flight took over. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of leukemia disappeared completely. The aching muscles and the sharp stabs of pain from chemotherapy were gone, replaced by a feeling of being light and entirely free. As he emerged from this passage, Zach entered a place that defied every earthly description. He talked about a vibrational reality where the colors were more vivid than anything found in nature. The sounds were not just music, they were part of the atmosphere itself. Researchers often hear people describe this state as being more real than the life we live every day. Even though he was a 14-year-old boy who had technically died, Zach felt absolutely no fear. There was no panic about his heart stopping or the doctors he left behind. He felt a profound sense of being home, as if he had returned to a place he had known long before he was ever born. During this ascent, Zach experienced what he called boundless knowledge. It was not like studying a textbook or listening to a long lecture. He only understood complex truths about the universe and how every living thing is connected. This information flowed into him all at once, providing answers to deep questions he had never even thought to ask. As he drifted further into this sea of light, he encountered a specific boundary. This was a point of no return, often described by survivors as a bridge or a line that cannot be crossed if one intends to return to the living world. Also, Zach was not alone in this space. He saw a powerful person nearby who was wearing a trench coat. This person was also an intelligent and loving force that watched Zach with complete and total acceptance. The presence did not speak with a human voice, yet its message was clear and unmistakable. He was being guided through this landscape of light for a reason. Everything about this whole encounter was felt purposeful and solid, far more than a mere dream or a hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain. He was standing on the threshold of something eternal and beautiful. In this sea of light, a familiar face appeared. This was the person who would provide the undeniable proof Zach needed to convince the world that his trip was not a trick of the mind. Now, who exactly was this person? The reunion with the grandfather. Zach realized the figure standing before him was his grandfather. This was a man who had passed away years ago, and he did not look like the elderly person Zach remembered from family stories. Instead, he appeared vibrant, strong, and completely restored to his youth. He looked as although he was in the prime of his life, standing with confidence and an energy that felt infectious. The two of them did not use their voices to communicate in the way people do on Earth. They shared a mind-to-mind connection where thoughts and emotions moved between them instantly. Here, there was no room for misunderstanding because every idea was shared with perfect clarity. During this meeting, his grandfather delivered a message that was both comforting and challenging. He explained that Zach's time in this realm was only temporary because he had a significant purpose to fulfill back in the living world. Now, what Zach's grandfather said was not a request, but a clear statement of fact. Also, Zach observed every detail of his grandfather's appearance, from the specific style of his clothing to the youthful features of his face. These physical details were sharp and clear, stuck into his memory with a precision that would later become the foundation of his evidence. Being in the presence of his grandfather removed every ounce of fear Zach had about his leukemia. The terminal diagnosis that had loomed over his life like a dark, cushy cloud suddenly felt small and insignificant compared to the peace he was experiencing. He felt a profound sense of family and belonging that made him want to stay in that place forever, and it created a massive internal struggle for the 14-year-old boy. The bliss of the afterlife was so powerful that the idea of returning to a body ravaged by cancer and a life of painful treatments felt like a heavy burden. His grandfather saw the reluctance in Zach and offered the comfort he needed to make the transition back. He reassured Zach that his life had value and that his parents still needed him to be part of their world. With a final command, his grandfather essentially sent him back toward the physical realm. But before he left, Zach's grandfather provided him with a specific piece of information about his own past life that served as a parting gift. This detail was something Zach had never been told by his parents and had never seen in a book or a movie. It was a secret from the past meant to prove that this encounter was entirely real. As Zach returned to his body with a story that seemed like a dream, he kept it to himself until he mentioned a detail about his grandfather that he couldn't possibly have known. The inexplicable evidence, the photo discovery. When Zach finally felt strong enough to talk about what happened while his heart was stopped, he went straight by telling his parents about the light or the tunnel he saw. Zach told his parents about his grandfather, whom he met. Being in shock, his dad decided to ask him questions like, "What did he tell you? What did he say? What did he look like?" Zach described his grandfather with incredible detail, noting that he looked like he was in his 20s or 30s. The most striking part of his description was the clothing. Zach was very specific about a heavy, classic trench coat his grandfather was wearing. His parents listened with a mix of confusion and wonder because Zach had only ever known his grandfather as an elderly man who was often sick. To a 14-year-old in 2001, a vintage trench coat was not exactly a standard fashion choice he would come up with on his own. With this, his parents were deeply unsettled by how accurate the description was. They knew that Zach had never seen his grandfather in his youth, especially not in such a specific outfit. After this encounter died down, months later, Zach noted that his father stumbled upon a rare old photograph that none of them had seen in years. It was a picture of Zach's grandfather as a young man, and he was wearing the exact trench coat Zach had described. The setting and the appearance were a perfect match. The timeline made this discovery impossible to explain away easily. Zach was a toddler when his grandfather passed away, and he certainly never saw this specific photo. It had been buried in storage since before he was even born. That was my validation that what I did experience was very real. I think my dad was surprised by that too, because I didn't think my granddad really was a trench coat wearer. He was a professional man. He was a chemist and stuff like that. So I think he wore more professional suits, not a trench coat. But in his younger years, when he was this young, dapper man, he was wearing this big trench coat, Zach recalled. Now, this kind of visual evidence is considered the strongest category of near-death research. It moves the conversation from a subjective feeling to something that can be verified by people who were not there. It also creates a massive dilemma for scientists who try to debunk these stories. Skeptics often argue that the brain is simply hallucinating as it shuts down. However, hallucinations are usually based on things a person already knows. They are not supposed to provide new, accurate information about the past that the person has never been exposed to. If the brain was truly failing from a lack of oxygen, it should have been producing scrambled and nonsensical images. Instead, Zach's mind captured a clear and historically accurate snapshot of a family member he never truly knew. This whole body of evidence suggested that his consciousness was actually traveling and observing things outside of his own memory. With the photo in hand, the case moved from a hallucination to a documented anomaly that left the medical community speechless. The miraculous return and recovery. Zach Tavcar returning to his body was anything but peaceful. It felt like falling from a great height and crashing into a cold, heavy cage. For several minutes, Zach had been weightless and entirely free of the cancer. Yet suddenly, every ache and spasm returned with a vengeance. His lungs burned as they pulled in the sterile hospital air once more. The medical team stood around his bed in a state of total shock. They had watched the flat line on the monitor and prepared to call his time of death, only to see his vitals stabilize in a way that they couldn't understand. 1 minute he was gone, and the next, his heart was beating with a steady, determined rhythm. The doctors and nurses at renowned children's hospital could track his heart rate and blood pressure. However, they couldn't see the internal change in his mind. Before the flatline, Zach was a scared teenager fighting a monster. But after he woke up, that fear was gone. He had a certainty about what happens after life that most people spend their whole lives searching for. This mental shift acted as fuel for his physical recovery. He knew his grandfather had told him he had a purpose, and that belief became his strongest medicine. Over the next 2 years, Zach stayed at the hospital to finish his grueling rounds of chemotherapy. While the treatment was physically exhausting, his spirit remained untouchable. He viewed the needles and the nausea as small hurdles on a much larger path. His medical files from those years are filled with data points and charts, yet there are obvious gaps where science fails to explain his sudden turnaround. The records show a boy who was clinically dead, yet he walked out of that oncology unit 2 years later as a survivor. His body had been a biological battlefield, but his mind was already at peace. Instead of keeping the experience to himself, Zach began to talk about his experience online. For some people, especially kids, hearing from someone their own age that there was nothing to fear in the dark was more comforting than any doctor's speech. He became a source of light in a place that often felt very dim. He wasn't a typical patient anymore. He was a witness to something bigger than the hospital walls. Zach also became a certified coach and exercise physiologist. His recovery wasn't a quick fix. It was a long and difficult climb. The true miracle wasn't that the cancer vanished instantly. The miracle was that he no longer feared the outcome. This lack of fear allowed his body to respond to treatment in a way that baffled his specialists. They noted his resilience in his charts, using clinical and dry words that couldn't capture the look in his eyes. As he regained his strength, his story traveled beyond the hospital corridors and into the world of science. But as Zach grew stronger, his story began to attract a different kind of attention from researchers looking for a key to his soul. Scientists under pressure, the skeptical view. Many people in the scientific community look at stories like Zach's and search for a logical, physical explanation. One of the most common theories involves a chemical called DMT. Some researchers believe that the brain releases a massive dose of this powerful psychedelic right as the body begins to shut down. They argue that this chemical flood could create the vivid tunnels and the bright lights that survivors describe. Another popular argument is oxygen deprivation, or hypoxia. The idea is that as the brain starves for air, it starts to malfunction and produce hallucinations. While these theories sound reasonable, they often fail to explain the most remarkable parts of Zach's journey. Hypoxia usually makes a person feel confused or foggy, but in Zach's case, he returned with memories that were more structured and clear than his everyday life. And now, this is where the work of experts like Dr. Sam Parnia comes into play. Through his famous AWARE study, Parnia has spent decades examining people who have experienced cardiac arrest. He discovered that consciousness can sometimes persist even after the heart has stopped, and the brain shows no outward signs of activity. This brings us to the biggest hurdle for skeptics, which is the problem of veridical perception. It is a scientific way of saying that a person knows things they should not know. In Zach's case, he identified a specific trench coat in a hidden photo that he had never seen before. A chemical dump or a lack of air cannot give a person historical facts about an ancestor's wardrobe. It suggests that Zach's awareness was operating independently of his physical body. The change in Zach was not only mental, it seemed to be structural. Researchers often look at the neuroplasticity angle to see how these events change the brain over time. After his recovery, Zach showed an intense level of empathy and a drive to volunteer that lasted for decades. It was as if his experience had physically rewired his brain to focus on connection rather than survival. Now, in 2026, the consensus in neuroscience is starting to lean toward a new possibility. Perhaps the brain does not create consciousness the way a stove creates heat. Instead, the brain might act as a receiver for it. Also, we are finally starting to see the limits of the EEG monitor. A flat line on a screen shows that the electrical activity on the surface has stopped. However, it does not mean the person is gone. Scientists are now forced to consider that the mind might exist on a level that our current machines simply cannot measure. But if the brain is a radio, was Zach simply tuning into a different frequency, one that exists even when the radio is broken? Life after death. The adult Zach. In 2026, Zach Tavcar stands as a healthy adult who has reached a milestone that once seemed unreachable. It has been 25 years since he first was diagnosed at the hospital with a terminal diagnosis, and today he remains completely cancer-free. The aggressive leukemia that tried to claim his life in 2001 is now a closed chapter in a medical file, yet the experience continues to define his entire world. Once he recovered, Zach did not just walk away from renowned children's hospital. Instead, he chose to return to the very place where his heart stopped. Currently, he spends his time as a volunteer in the pediatric oncology unit, offering a unique kind of support to children and parents who are currently fighting the same battles he once faced. Seeing him walk through those halls as a strong, healthy man gives those families a tangible reason to keep going. This drive to help others is a direct result of what researchers call NDE after effects. When Zach came back from that sea of light, he brought a new set of values with him. He developed an intense level of intuition and a perspective on life that is far beyond his years. He also carries a total absence of fear regarding death. For most people, the end of life is a terrifying mystery. However, for Zach, it is a place he has already visited and found to be peaceful. This lack of fear has allowed him to live a more bold and meaningful life. The impact of his journey also deeply changed his parents. The discovery of the photo showing his grandfather in that specific trench coat provided them with a piece of physical evidence that they could never explain away. It shifted their own views on mortality and confirmed that their son's experience was far more than a vivid dream. Over the years, Zach has shared his story on a global platform. He has appeared on numerous podcasts and was a central figure in the documentary titled Back from Death. His testimony has reached millions of people, providing a sense of comfort to those who have lost loved ones. He believes his primary mission is to be a witness to the reality of the soul. He does not try to force his beliefs on anyone. He only shares what he saw and felt with a calm and grounded tone. Despite the extraordinary nature of his past, he lives a very normal life. He balances his role as a public storyteller with the simple routines of everyday adulthood. He is a living example of how a brush with the unknown can make a person more present and focused on the here and now. As we look to the future, the biggest question isn't just how the brain functions, but whether our awareness is something that can ever truly be contained by a physical body. If we cannot explain Zach's journey using simple medical terms, we have to look toward the strange world of quantum physics to find the truth. The quantum consciousness theory, one of the most exciting ideas in modern science, treats the soul as a form of quantum data. Instead of thinking of your personality as something the brain creates, researchers are starting to view consciousness as information that cannot be destroyed. Now, this brings us to a concept known as the OR theory, which was developed by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. They suggest that our thoughts actually live in tiny structures inside our brain cells called microtubules. When a person's heart stops, this quantum information does not simply vanish. Instead, it leaks out of the body and back into the universe. It would explain why Zach felt like he was expanding into a sea of light because he was not disappearing into the dark. He was returning to a larger field of information. This transition is often called non-local awareness. It suggests that Zach's mind was no longer trapped in a hospital bed in Nevada. He was essentially accessing a universal cloud of knowledge. The theory also helps explain his reunion with his grandfather. In the world of physics, two particles can stay connected across any distance through a process called entanglement. If human souls operate on this same level, it explains how Zach could find a specific person and receive accurate information from them instantly. He was not merely having a vivid dream. He was connecting to a real data stream that exists outside of our normal physical space. Also, Zach is not alone in this mystery. His experience mirrors other famous accounts, such as the one from Pam Reynolds. She was able to accurately describe surgical tools and the conversations of her doctors, while her brain was completely shut down. By 2026, several new breakthroughs have changed the way we view these events. Recent studies have captured organized bursts of high-frequency activity in the brain during the final moments of life. These findings suggest that the transition from this world to the next might be the most conscious moment a person ever experiences. We are finally moving from asking if these stories are real to asking what they mean for our daily lives. If we are all part of this connected field of information, then the way we treat each other carries a much heavier weight. Zach's story shows us that life is not a collection of random accidents. There is a clear structure and a purpose to everything we go through. This shift in thinking changes the way we look at medicine and mortality. Knowing that there is a realm beyond our physical sight allows us to live with a much higher level of courage. Have you ever experienced something that science could not explain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.